What is up, guys? Welcome back to Pat Outdoors. Today we're going to be working on my Surron LBX. As some of you guys may know, I recently purchased this on Craigslist, not running, and then we fixed it, but my buddy Nate ended up crashing it just a couple miles down the street shortly after. So we've got some work to do, and I figured I may as well install some upgrades while we're at it. The damage wasn't too severe. You just broke the headlight. See, the housing is actually cracked and scratched up my Fender that I just installed on there, but that's not a big deal since I already ordered plastics anyway. It was already missing the rear fender, but we're gonna be installing that today. But I'm kind of upset that he tore up this seat cover that I literally just installed. This was actually my first time redoing a Surron seat, and I was pretty happy with the cover fitment, but look at that. But that's not a big deal since we are using this thing as a trail bike anyway. Also going to be getting rid of these pedals. I think they're pretty useless. This is the Kanawaba kit. Whenever I'm cranking full speed, I can only get the Surron maybe going like 4 or 5 miles an hour anyway. So I think it's pretty silly. I don't really care about the whole cop situation. So we're going to be replacing these with some pegs. And it's bent anyway. So if you look at it in a 90-degree angle, you'll notice that this pedal is shifted forward. And like I said, we are going to be using this bike for trail use. Since the Talaria, I ride mostly on the street since it's got the 17-inch wheel set. So I'm going to be installing a larger sprocket for the rear to give this thing a little bit more torque. We're going to be swapping out the chain as well. My biggest concern with this bike right now is when I turn it on, it still works perfectly, but when I turn right, it stops working. I thought it was the oddest thing, then it completely shuts off the throttle. And I gotta fix this now since I promised my buddy Pat that we're gonna be riding on his trails tomorrow. And I don't really feel like digging out my YZ from storage. The first thing we're gonna be doing is replacing this broken factory headlamp with this blinder style LED headlamp. This thing is supposed to be super bright and it's supposed to be direct bolt on, since the bracket width is supposed to be the same as factory. And then it already comes with a factory style plug on there. So it should be plug and play, but we're also gonna be adding a switch to the system. Since with Surrons, if you key on, it automatically leaves the headlight on. There's actually no way of turning it off. So I'm also gonna be adding a plug and play switch while we're at it. And before we mess with any sort of electronic components, we're gonna turn the breaker off. You know what, I'm actually just gonna pull the battery out, leave it more space. I'm gonna take the ignition cover off. I believe the headlight plug is down there. It's hidden in the sleeve that has the brake sensors in it as well. I'm gonna slide the sleeve back, just like that, and then plugs. The bracket width is not exactly the same. It's actually a little bit more narrow. So I'm gonna add some washers on both sides to make it the same, so we don't have to modify the factory bracket. I'm not gonna use this bracket or the hardware that came with it. So before I tighten everything in place, I just wanna show you how I have the hardware oriented. So I put a spacer in between the light and the bracket, just so we don't end up bending the bracket too far inward. This actually makes it perfectly tensioned. So I'm gonna position it to the way I want it now and then torque it down in place. You know what, maybe I should thank Nate for crashing my bike. I wouldn't have a reason to do all these upgrades. Now I'm gonna be adding this inline switch in between the current connector for the headlight and the factory connector. This just disconnects the circuit so it doesn't automatically turn on the headlight, and then you just turn it on whenever you want to. If you are interested in checking out any of the items that we're using for today's project, I'll have everything linked in the description below. Yeah, I think I'm gonna mount the switch on the right side. All right, let's put the battery back in and see if it works. All right, so key on. What do you guys think? Wow, that is pretty bright. I can see why they call this a blinder headlight. Check that out. There's a lot of separate LED chips in this housing, so I can see why this is so bright. So this is definitely going to be an improvement over the factory one. All right, next thing we're gonna be doing is deleting this pedal kit set. Well, actually, we're not gonna be fully deleting it. I'm gonna see if I can keep the Kanewaba brackets in place and just install the peg adapters on there. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with the other side, but the other side is way too torqued down. Yeah, it should have been simple like that. So I'm just gonna take this pedal out and take everything else out in the center and try to pull it out from the other side. All right, so the free wheel is now sliding freely. Kind of glad that we're doing this since I'm going to be reducing the amount of drag on the axle. Just reduces the weight overall as well. Then the center sprocket is actually 2-piece, so I should be able to take out all these bolts and then split it in half. Just like that. Now we just got to take out the chain. All right, so I found the master link. So I'm gonna just pull this clip off and then pull out the master link. So I'm just gonna be using these peg brackets that are factory style. I just got these off AliExpress. I think they were like $8 a pop. And then I'm gonna be using the factory pegs from my Talaria XXX. It actually fits exactly the same. I'm keeping the Kanewaba brackets in place since I like that it has 2 peg positions. If I wanted to move it forward about 1 inch, I have the option to do so. But I want to take this out as it is to see how I feel about it. Just using a standard set of circuit pliers. And that's how it's supposed to be oriented. So if you hit like a stump, it just brings the peg back. So let's go wrap up the other side. Yeah, I like that. That's a really nice snug fit. It feels almost like factory. Just like that. Next, we're going to be replacing this scratched up Talaria XXX fender that I put on there temporarily anyway until we get a factory Surron one. So I just added this factory replacement rear fender, and I've only seen these things online. I didn't realize it's this small. It's like maybe 4 inches long. What do you guys think? Should I get the extended one if I'm riding this thing on some trails? Now we're gonna be doing a drivetrain upgrade to give this bike a little bit more torque. We're gonna be installing this Warp 9 52 tooth aluminum rear sprocket. It is noticeably larger than the factory sprocket, which is supposed to be 48 tooth, which usually results in a slightly lower top speed in trade-off for more low-end torque, which is what we need for a trail bike. Since I'm not really planning on going much faster than 40, 44 miles an hour with a Surron, for trail use, this is actually perfect. You can even go to a 58 tooth if you just want the front end to pop up really easily. If you're riding around town and you're planning on doing wheelies, that might be the case, but I think this is gonna be the perfect size for my use. And I'm using a RK 110 link 420 chain, which is supposed to be perfectly matched for this sprocket size. If you are interested in checking out any of the items that we're using for today's project, I'll have everything linked in the description below. The rear axle nut is a 17 millimeter. Look at that size difference. Man, that new Warp 9 sprocket looks really pretty. That is certainly a visual upgrade. Oh, my fault. This Warp 9 sprocket's actually a 54 tooth, not a 52 tooth. So I'm just gonna leave the rear axle somewhat loose until we get the new chain on, and then we can make adjustments to tension it correctly. Just gotta find the master link. All right, there it is. We're just gonna take this clip off and disconnect this chain. Wow, that chain is a lot more free. Yeah, this definitely seems like the proper match as far as chain size. 110 links for a 54 tooth sprocket. One thing to note about this new chain, it feels a lot more loose and free. That's because there's a lot less drag on it since it's not an O-ring chain. It's just a typical pit bike, dirt bike chain, which reduces the amount of drag in the drivetrain, but it does result in slightly more maintenance. So you just need to clean your chain and lubricate it more often. Now I'm just gonna unlock these 10 millimeter nuts and adjust the bolts back on both sides to slide the axle back evenly. Make sure that these blocks are evenly spaced left and right to make sure that the rear tire is tracking straight. Once you have the chain tension right where you want it, you can lock the 10 millimeter nuts on both sides. Just make sure there's no abnormal noises and that the rear rotor is perfectly aligned between the brake pads. Since this is a brand new chain, I'm expecting it to stretch a little bit after this first weekend ride and just have a little bit more slack. It'll likely end up exactly where I want it. Next is the most important part of today, figuring out why this bike won't run if they have the handlebar turned slightly to the right. I'm gonna be using this diagnostic cable that I got on eBay for like 25 bucks. Here's the part number in case you want it. If you bought your Surron brand new, it should have came with one of these, but if you bought your Surron used like I did, it is definitely a must for diagnosing. All right, I'm gonna turn the breaker off and it actually goes over here. I'm just gonna unplug this connector and we're gonna plug it inline. So diagnostic cable first and then factory harness going to the diagnostic cable. Then we're gonna keep an eye on this red LED lamp. Turn the breaker on. I'm gonna turn the handlebar to the right first, and then I'm gonna key on. This should give us an idea. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So you notice it blinked 15 times before it took a long pause. I printed out this Light B diagnostic identification chart online, but it gives us a full list of what the potential errors are. So 15 flashes means throttle to controller signal wire short circuit. So there's a wiring issue with the throttle that we need to diagnose. I double checked the connector to make sure that it is fully secured. As of right now, I'm suspecting the throttle to be just busted or the cable inside the insulation is stretched from when Nate crashed it. I'm gonna turn the handlebar straight again, and then I'm gonna key on just for confirmation purposes and see how many flashes we get. 1. So it only flashes 1 blink at a time. So it's definitely some sort of wiring issue because it acts completely normal when the handlebar is straight. So I'm just gonna take this diagnostic cable off and we're gonna look at the throttle wiring. I'm just gonna be installing a brand new Surron OEM throttle. I didn't have much luck with using an aftermarket one. I tried installing this last time when I was having a different issue and it was just completely non-functional. I'm thinking the cables inside the insulation probably stretched when the handlebar turned when Nate crashed it. It probably just pulled on the wiring too much, would be my analysis. One thing to keep in mind when you're replacing the throttle on a Surron is you keep the flat spot on the backside against the back of the brake lever. That's what gives it room for you to compress it. Otherwise, it'll bind up against it. And while we're here, we might as well replace these torn up gray factory grips with a fresh set of black ones. I gotta admit, this is my least favorite part of throttle installs. Nice and smooth. Oh, it was time to replace them regardless. In order to plug the throttle to the controller, we have to access the plug, which is located up here. So we gotta take the skid plate off. The plug for the throttle is a 3-pin connector with a black, brown, and blue wire. All right, before we put all the covers back on and fully secure everything, I'm gonna just test this to make sure that the throttle functions correctly when the handlebars turn right. And it works as it should, so we can now put everything back together. The last thing that I want to do to this bike before we take it out on some trails is get rid of some of these decals that were installed incorrectly. So you see they're all crooked. This one's definitely out of place. I'm not really sure what the previous guy was thinking. If I can just get rid of all these decals that were installed crooked, I think the bike would look a lot cleaner. This thing is looking clean. Check out how bright that headlight is. And we can also turn this one off. I'm really curious to see how much more lower end torque we're gonna have with this new Warp 9 54 tooth sprocket. Let's go take this thing out. All right, just to give you guys an idea of how bright this headlight is, check that out. That is such a wide lit view. I don't have to warm up my bike. Yeah, even though these factory Surron tires don't have as much grip as the Shinko 241s on my Talaria, I like how the Surron feels with the 19-inch wheel set, with the lighter stock tires. It just feels a little bit more agile. Holy shit, I can't believe it did that. And the Surron surprisingly does quite well for being completely stock power. It climbs up that steep grade for a long period, no issues. Dude, I need to borrow that for my property.
Yes.
That'll speed up the trail building process.
One downside versus this versus like riding my Kawasaki is I don't get to grip the tank area as tight.
Yeah.
So I find my upper body a little bit tighter.
Yep.
On my dirt bike, I can grip it with my legs and be a little bit more loose with my arms. This is as far as a bar pad gets on a KTM, huh?
It's pretty pathetic.
So 12 grand, you get 5 inches of bar pad.
Yep. Like a half-ass bar pad.
Good. I'm kind of glad that you plowed it down a little bit for me. I honestly probably would have ate it.
I smacked the tree with the bark buster. My hand would have been toast.
Yeah, that's definitely the next thing that I got to get for this Talaria.
Definitely. Especially if you're doing.
Oh my God, did I say Talaria? I meant Surron.
I'm tired.
Oh, yeah, I'm done. I'm done.
I'm done. Usually when we say, yeah, I'm tired, and then we say, let's do a little more, that's when
something always goes wrong. All right, so the battery is down to 66% and we started at 404, so we rode about 8 miles in the woods. That's actually pretty efficient, and considering it's still stock.